The inverted pyramid is the most powerful idea for organizing our writing. And by organizing, I mean deciding what goes first, what goes second, and so forth. As a writer, our natural inclination is to organize our thoughts from our own perspective. Perhaps we describe the work in a chronological perspective. This happened first, and then this happened, and then this happened. Or we build our logic one step at a time until we have made a case for our main conclusion. We might build our logic like we would develop a mathematical proof. Now let's look at it from our reader's perspective. The reader, when we read stuff that's organized chronologically or logically, from our perspective, has to absorb a stream of facts without knowing the conclusion to which we're building. And they may even miss the entire conclusion because it's buried somewhere in the middle of a paragraph, 3/4 of the way through your paper. So you want to write the way a defense attorney might talk. He would open to the jury by stating his central idea: my client is innocent because. But you may say, that's the way I already write. I already write in an inverted pyramid. If that's true, congratulations. But I've been writing for a long time. I've co-authored books and written a lot of papers and reports and memos and emails, and I still end up going back and reorganizing my writing because my normal stream of consciousness first draft is typically not in an inverted pyramid. So to make believers out of students in the classroom, here's a little experiment I often do. I ask the students to begin writing their autobiography, and I stop them after a couple of minutes, and I go around the room and ask what they've written. And by far the most frequent first sentence begins with, "I was born." Now that could be the most important first sentence if you were born during a tsunami that wiped out your hometown, but otherwise it's probably not. Here's an example of how you might start your autobiography. After you read this sentence, you are dying to read the rest of the book to hear what happened to Edgar Mint and how he's still alive and lucid enough to write a book. So in this book, the goal is probably to entertain, so we lay out the most entertaining idea first. Now, in writing technical reports, our idea is to educate and to persuade. And our goal should be to open with the most educational and compelling idea that we have. Before we start applying these ideas, let's summarize what we're trying to do with the inverted pyramid. We're trying to make the reader's job easier by saying this is what the report is about, this is why the report should be interesting to you, and this is the conclusion that everything that you read is going to be supporting. Let's talk about how you write in an inverted pyramid. So far, I've focused on the opening sentence. Now let's apply that idea of the inverted pyramid iteratively so that your paper is going to look like one of those self-similar forms in fractal geometry. Any place you look at the paper and at any level of detail at which you look, you should see the inverted pyramid. You look at the paragraphs, they're arranged in the order of importance. Grab a particular paragraph, the sentences are arranged in order of importance. Now the final idea is a very important supporting idea. That idea is that each paragraph contains one theme stated by the first sentence, and the other sentences support that theme. So stuffing 2 or 3 themes into one paragraph will confuse your readers, so we do not do that. Let's put you in the position of a reader. Let's suppose that you're the chief operations officer of a manufacturing company, and you're thinking about buying a scheduling software package called Magic. And you have assigned the job of making a recommendation about purchasing or not purchasing the software to somebody. And the report that you have received is on the following slide. Quickly read the report and write down one idea that you got from reading it. That's your assignment. Stop the video at this point and read this report. And after you read it, you might make note of the primary point that you picked up on as you read the video. Okay, read these 4 ideas here, these 4 themes, and think about which one you would want to present to your reader first. Here's what you have to remember. As COO, you ask for a recommendation on whether or not to buy the software. Suppose you're the CEO and you're between terminals in the Atlanta airport and you're riding down the conveyor and you look across and you see in the other direction the person you commissioned to do the study. So let's suppose you yell out and say, "Hey, have you got anything for me yet?" And the person just has a few seconds to respond. What should she say? And what she should say is, "Don't buy the software." Now, some of you may argue that the writer has uncovered a fundamentally important problem in the company. The fact that the incentive system encourages the employees to miss schedules. That's true, but in this context, you were asked for a software purchase recommendation, so that should be the theme of your entire report. So now let's build that report, and this is the process that you should be using in any report that you write. So here is the most important idea captured in the first paragraph. I recommend that we don't buy the software. It's not going to help us. The software works only if the production times are predictable. Paragraph 2, you've just stated that the software won't work for us because our production times aren't predictable. So now you have to say this is why we can't adhere to a schedule, because our production times aren't predictable, and so forth. You can almost imagine the reader, after reading the first paragraph, thinking, why can't we adhere to a schedule? Aren't our production times predictable? And then the next paragraph is going to say, I'm not recommending against the software because we don't need something. We do have serious delivery problems, and I'm documenting that right here. But the software is not going to fix that. And the next question would be, why do we have delivery problems? So now we'll bring up the why of the delivery problems, and that's the relationship with the employees, and we'll provide the supporting evidence for that. In the last paragraph, we document how we arrived at our conclusions, and we point out the fact that all the graphs and tables and other supporting evidence are given in the complete report. So now, when you, as the COO, reads the report, you know what its recommendations are, you know why they were made, and you know how that recommendation was reached. And the report itself will follow an inverted pyramid. In the complete report, we organize the sections, the paragraphs within the sections, and the sentences within the paragraph in an inverted pyramid. For example, the first section would focus on the test results with the software, documenting that it didn't solve our problems. So here's what we're trying to do with the inverted pyramid. We're trying to make the reader better informed, more attentive, and more curious about what it is we're writing. And that's going to summarize everything that we talk about in writing techniques. We always need to look at the writing from the perspective of the reader rather than from the perspective of the writer. I was once interviewed by a reporter for one of the news services, and he wrote a 7-page article based on our interview. And the article was put out on the news wires, and it showed up in different newspapers. But in some it showed up with the full 7 paragraphs. In others it might have been 5 paragraphs, and still others only 3, depending on how much space the newspaper needed to fill. And the writer had written it in such a way that it still made sense in all of those forms. That's the result of the inverted pyramid. You could chop off the last paragraphs and the preceding would still make sense. So let's relate our inverted pyramid to the things that we read every day. Newspaper, magazine articles, online articles, news segments on TV and on the radio and so forth. And the format for news articles basically says this. You open by telling the reader the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So if you look at this article here, you see the who, the people involved. You see what happened. There was a beating. And the how, and where, and when, and why. Now, after you've read the who, what, when, where, why, and how, your next question would be, well, how's the victim? Did he survive the beating? So that's going to be our second paragraph, and it's here. And then after you read that, start thinking about what your next question would be. Well, it's probably going to be something like, well, what about her? What did they do to her? And this paragraph is going to answer our next question, what did they do with her? And the final paragraph has a collection of other related facts and the history behind all of this and so forth. And you notice it doesn't hold together quite as well as some of the other paragraphs. So what I would suggest that you do is look occasionally at newspaper articles, read the first paragraph, and notice how it lays out the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and then skip all the way down to the very last paragraph and read it, and you sort of see a collection of background and loosely related facts and history and so forth that's not quite as tightly organized. And this slide simply says, look at the first bullet, and this is the way we tend to think ourselves, and then look at the other bullet and it says, now look at it from the perspective of the reader. If you were the reader, would you want to read the whole report before you found out what it's supposed to be telling you? And by the way, these ideas also apply with oral presentations. You almost need to think, suppose the people in the audience might have to get up and run out of the room after your first slide because of a fire alarm or whatever. You would want to make sure that after they saw your first slide, they got the most important fact that you wanted to convey to them. To most rules, there are exceptions, and in the case of the inverted pyramid, there is one very, very rare exception. Stating the conclusion first would be a bad idea only if you thought it was going to cause the reader to throw your report in the garbage after the first sentence. For example, if you, as the COO, had already decided that you wanted to buy the magic software, then the writer might want to build a case before he springs the conclusion on you. But those cases are very, very rare. There's something else that we did to the magic software report that made it easier to read. The words were initially all jammed together in a single paragraph, and as we reorganized it, we divided it into small digestible pieces, each piece supporting a single idea. Now we can make those pieces even more digestible using some other tricks. Put a lot of white space between your paragraphs, and that signals to the reader, okay, here's something new that we're starting. And use bullets and numbering to break up the ideas into even smaller digestible pieces. And finally, do not break the flow of ideas by putting in pages and pages of details. That's what appendices are for. The appendices say to the reader, if you need the details, they're there. But here in the text are the important ideas that you need to get. So it's sort of like saying to the reader, most of what you need to know is here in this text, but it's not unsubstantiated. The supporting facts and the figures and the diagrams and the other details are there in the appendix for anyone who wants to see them.